Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello! Thanks so much for checking out this episode, which is episode 2 of the Check Your Thread podcast. How have you been since the first episode? I hope you've been well. I hope your sewing projects have been going swimmingly and that any sustainability actions you've been taking have also been going smoothly. I've had an incredible week. So I'm recording this intro a couple of days after launching the podcast, and I cannot believe the wonderful response that it has received. I honestly couldn't have predicted such a warm response to my new endeavour, so thank you so much. It's like a whole chunk of the sewing community have seen one of their people trying something new and collectively and actively got behind it. I've received so many lovely comments and messages and emails of support, plus people have been subscribing to the podcast in their apps, and some people have already been sending me awesome ideas for future episodes. I also want to directly thank Lee, Lucy, Jack, Alison, Charlotte and Julie for becoming patrons of Check Your Thread over on Patreon. Thank you so much, guys. Your monthly support is really going to help make it possible to keep making new episodes. So what's going on in episode 2? You've probably already seen the title of this episode, so you know that today I've got a guest, and it's the super inspiring Wendy Ward. I've known Wendy in real life for a number of years, so I know that reducing her environmental impact is very important to her both personally and in her business. She's gone so far as to literally write a book called How to Sew Sustainably, so I couldn't think of a better person to ask to be the first person I get to chat to on the podcast. So before I play our conversation, let me give you a bit more info about Wendy. Wendy Ward is a designer, author and teacher currently living in the north of England. She's had an incredibly interesting and jam-packed career to date. So she was encouraged to have a go at sewing when she was a kid, when she was bought a hand-operated Singer sewing machine by her dad. That early introduction led her to study fashion design at university, after which she landed the role of boyswear designer for a major UK fashion retailer called Matalam. Finding the experience of working in fast fashion pretty soul-destroying, she then found a job working for a small company which produced clothes from organic fair trade cotton made by small cooperatives in India. This experience taught her a lot about sustainability in the clothing and textile industries. A stint as a freelance designer came next, working for clothing companies large and small. Wendy was then inspired by some friends to retrain as a teacher. She taught design and technology to 11 to 18-year-olds, then segued into adult education, which included teaching sewing skills in disadvantaged areas. When the opportunity came up for her to open her own sewing workshop space, she grabbed it. So that's how I know Wendy, because I taught at her workshop about 6 years ago. She's also designed and released her own sewing patterns and written 5 books about sewing, the most recent of which is called How to Sew Sustainably. In our conversation, Wendy shared about her approach to sewing more sustainably and has given us tips and ideas from her book and her sewing life. So sit tight, here we go. Hello, Wendy.
Hi, Zoe.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you? It's been ages.
It's been so long. So I guess I should explain that we know each other in real life.
Yeah, but God, how many years ago was that?
I'm guessing about 5. About that?
Really, as long as that? That's quite shocking. Blimey. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, let's back up a bit. Wendy, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Oh, my goodness, right. Hello, I'm Wendy Ward. I have written books about sewing, and I've got a blog, and I, pre-pandemic, was teaching classes. Yeah.
Amazing. So when did you have the idea for this one? Because this is a little bit different, isn't it, from your previous books?
It is a bit different. I kind of would say really it's a book that I've wanted to write for a long time. That kind of started in a way back when I was doing my degree.
Right, really?
Yeah, so I wrote my dissertation in 2000, and I wrote it all about the environmental impact of fashion and textiles.
Wow.
And that was a time...
You were very ahead of the curve then, because most fashion students weren't really thinking or talking about that kind of thing at the
There were
time, were
kind of
they?
rumblings, but not it. Yeah, you couldn't find an awful lot of information about that kind of subject at that time, which I think is why it appealed to me. I thought, oh, there's a bit of information about this, but not much. Let's see what else we can find. And the company that I ended up working for, that I told you about earlier, that sent me off to India, I'd done a bit of work experience with them in my final year of my degree, and that definitely influenced my thinking, which made me write about that. And then a couple of years after graduating, I did an MA part-time, and in that I looked at different ways that textiles could be recycled. And then when I first started teaching in adult ed, as well as the dressmaking classes, I also taught classes on alterations and a kind of creative textiles class where we just used recycled textiles.
So it's almost been 20 years in the making then, this book.
Yeah.
So this book includes projects that cover pretty much every type of scrap fabric or unwanted clothing that you might have around the house. So what do you do? What's your approach? Do you keep all your scraps and leftovers, or do you have some sort of filter system? Like, can you give us some advice?
Yeah, I know. It's a hard one. I have to say, since I moved and closed my workshop, I'm doing a lot less making, I have to say. So I feel in a way I am generating less leftover, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I do have a bit of a system. Bigger pieces. So anything bigger than, what would I say, like a sort of A4 size piece of paper, say,
Right.
for example. So kind of fairly useful size pizzas. They go in one storage system. I also do like to collect really small pieces and all of that lovely spaghetti that you get off your own.
I mean, I feel like sometimes my scraps and leftovers, they start to feel like a bit of a burden. Like,
Yeah.
I have so much and they start to spill out of their containers.
Yeah.
And it feels a bit stressful. Do you ever feel like that?
Yeah. Because it's all about storage, isn't it?
Yeah.
And most of us living here in UK don't have vast amounts of space in which.
Yeah. And most of us don't tend to have their own sewing room necessarily. Yeah.
No. So you've got to negotiate with the rest of your family. Yeah, what they might think of is bags of rubbish taking over communal living space. So it can take a lot. It can be a bit stressful and take up a lot of headspace and physical space. But if there's stuff that you think, look, I really don't want to keep this, it is just doing my head in, I'm never going to use it. Often schools will be pleased to have it because they use a lot of stuff in craft projects. So
Yeah.
that's always a good first place to kind of go to see if they want it. There are kind of, I know not every town has them, but there are lots of towns that have, they're like a bank for materials that people don't
Yeah.
want. And you can go and buy stuff really cheaply for craft projects and things. And it can be anything, I think it can be anything from like textiles, plastics, paper, all kinds of stuff. And I have given lots of fabric to charity shops, but I try to only give more usable pieces that I think people would actually make use of. And then, your last resort, I suppose, really, if you can't keep it, you can't give it to someone that's going to use it, then just make sure it goes in a textile recycling bank.
Yeah.
And there's always a few dotted around. Just please don't ever put it in the bin, because that's the last place to put it.
Yeah. I often put, when I have those bits that I can't get rid of, I'll put them and I'll write on it on the bag in a pen, like fabric scraps or whatever, so the person at the warehouse or whatever isn't opening it up and it's all spilling everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So if somebody is quite new to sewing and they haven't yet acquired like a mountain of fabric scraps and leftovers to plunder, what other ways could they introduce aspects of sustainability into their sewing, would you say?
It's really just thinking about where you're getting fabrics from, and start with stuff that's around your house, because also then, you're not going to feel as worried about it if you mess up what you're kind of experimenting with, and what, because obviously when we first start sewing or first start any kind of practical skill, it doesn't always go right, does it?
I know exactly. Like of the first few years of sewing, like how many of those garments are we still wearing?
Yeah, exactly. I know. I wish I could find some of the things I made when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, I would imagine most households are going to have bedding, curtains, clothes that old jeans, perfect, that they're not going to keep anymore, and that maybe would have gone to charity shop or would have gone to textile recycling bank. And if you're starting to have a go at sewing, just have a go on them. It's a really good kind of low pressured place to start, and it's not going to cost you a fortune, is it either?
I mean, I know you said you're slowing down your output a little bit at the moment, but like, what's your ratio between like new fabric to like scraps and leftovers?
I've not bought any new fabric I can't remember the last time I bought some new fabric. It's quite a long time. It might have been when I was working on the book before this one.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so it's Sewing Basics. So I spent all of last year working on how to sew sustainably.
I really love that you can see some of the fabrics you used in your last book in some of the projects in this one. I really like that.
I'm really glad you've noticed that. Yeah. That was a really conscious decision to do that as well. Yeah. I thought, I'm kind of saying all this stuff in this book and giving.
You've got to live it, exactly.
Yeah, I've got to take my own advice here. I've got to do these things. You sometimes feel a bit of a pressure with a book to be, buying all the nice new fabrics, the latest fabric, all of that. But I made a real conscious decision that no, I'm not going to do that. So thankfully, last year, the year of the pandemic, thankfully, I had this book to work on for most of the year, and I was able to re-look at all of my fabrics that I got and work through them a bit.
Yeah.
All of the projects that use smaller pieces, they're all from my kind of scrap collection. All of the samples that use old clothes, I didn't go out and buy some new clothes from a charity shop. They were clothes that were sitting unused of mine and my partner's anyway. Yeah. And then the projects that use whole pieces of fabric, they have been sitting in my stash.
So what's your favourite project or technique that's featured in your book?
Can I have two?
Of course. Have as many as you want.
I really enjoy, and I think you've been enjoying recently as well, piecing together leftover fabrics.
So satisfying.
Yeah. And then using that to make, I mean, I've been making lots of clothes like that. But I just love the sort of the happy accidents that come up, when you put fabric together that you thought, oh God, they're not going to look great together. And then in the grand jumble of everything, you think, oh, actually, I quite like that. And then it's that story that they tell as well, isn't it? Like, oh yeah, that's left over from that project, and that's a scrap cut out from, so-and-so's garment that they didn't want anymore. And it's just like layers and layers of interest and storytelling in what you're making, which I really like.
Yeah, you can really get in the zone as well, can't you, with playing with the fabric, and it's a whole part of the project in itself, isn't it? That normally you just lay your fabric out and you start to cut, but
it's like a whole different approach, isn't it? Because you're really thinking, right, it's like that little challenge of how much of this can I use, or rather, how little of this can I leave behind when I've finished?
Yes, yeah. So, and you can use up the pieces that you've had for years.
Yeah, and them little pieces that you think, oh, that means something for a particular reason, or it's sort of a nicer way of keeping stuff in a way. And also then you get to use it and see it all the time. It's not just hidden away in a box or a bag somewhere.
And you get more value from your initial investment in that fabric as well.
Yeah. And then, so I've been really enjoying that, and I've been really enjoying your stuff that you've been making, kind of using that sort of philosophy as well. And then the other one that I've really enjoyed is the Scrappy collages using hand sewing. It's just, I just enjoyed making them so much, because I've kind of for such a long time focused focused on dressmaking. You know, I really enjoy hand sewing. But in dressmaking, the few bits of hand sewing that I've done have been in like temporary stitching, so tacking things,
Right.
and preparing stuff, or maybe, you know, like a bit of hand stitching to finish a hem or to sew a
Yeah.
button or something on. So not,
Yeah, there's not that much you can actually do on the sofa, is there?
yeah,
When
no,
it comes to garment
exactly. It's a
making.
bigger piece of, it's a bigger thing that you're making, isn't it? And it's often not done to be seen, that kind of hand sewing that you tend to
True.
do in dressmaking. So yeah, I really enjoyed making them. And as I were making them, I was thinking, wow, I really need to do more of this. This is just so nice. And then also, you know, and then using the tiniest of scraps and the same sort of satisfaction from, you know, piecing together the bigger pieces to then make into clothes. It's that same sort of feeling of, oh yeah, I remember where this scrap came from, and that's a bit cut out from that. And because you're hand sewing, you're touching it more as well, I suppose. But yeah.
So, my personal favourite project from your book is the Strength in Numbers scarf and snood
Oh,
projects.
cool.
I really love those. In the past, I've tried to do something similar using old jumpers, but I
Nice.
think I got the dimensions a bit off. So I'm really excited to try again using the measurements that you've put in your book.
Yeah.
I think it's such a good way as well for using like scraps and leftovers of thicker knits like
Yeah.
sweatshirt fleece and stuff, because you know they're too thick to make undies from, and you know unless you've got tiny children to sew for, like I've struggled to think of what you can do with those, and that's such a fun, presumably quite quick, but also like really usable
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
product that you can make. Like I don't, you know, I really like to make things that are going to get a lot of use, you know, because like where I work, sometimes it is freezing. So something like that would just be wonderful just to have. And you can like, you know, leave one at work and leave one in your
Yeah.
bag, you know, for whenever you're feeling a bit chilly. I also think that they would make amazing gifts as well. So I plan to make loads of those just before Christmas.
I did that one year, made loads for Christmas. And
Yeah.
yeah, they're just that kind of really useful thing, aren't they? That everyone uses them. Maybe not the
Yeah.
infinity scarf so much, but yeah, maybe even the infinity scarf. But like, especially the little snoods, you know, women wear them, men use them,
Yeah.
kids can use them. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, they're just that really useful thing, and quite, you know, some of the littler ones, maybe quite a nice way of using up worn out t-shirts and stuff as well.
Yeah. And you can kind of personalize them as well, can't you? By you know, choosing someone's favorite color, or you know, a color that they tend to wear quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
So I guess from my perspective, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the overarching theme of your book is kind of encouraging sewers to look at scraps and existing textiles in a new way. So like as the potential basis of a new project. So aside from reducing the demand for virgin textiles, I think also the other major benefit is it can actually save us money as well.
definitely.
Therefore it kind of makes crafting accessible at times when maybe you're, you know, you're on a lower budget, or maybe you're generally on a lower income. So you made a really interesting point recently in the comments of one of your Instagram posts, which I'll link in the show notes. And you made the analogy between the commercialization of craft and sewing and the gentrification of a town or city. And that point like really clicked with me. And it's something that I've been feeling for a long while, but you just kind of nailed it. And I was like,
Well,
yes, that is exactly it. And I just thought that was such a powerful and interesting point. So would you mind like explaining a bit more about that?
yeah, it's just that I don't know when it came to me. For ages, there's been that kind of things go a bit, you know, in cities and towns, areas get a bit run down and they're not that popular anymore. And then the creatives and the artists move in, and suddenly, you know, it's kind of desirable again. And I can think of a place less than a mile away from where I grew up that is
Yeah.
experiencing exactly that at the moment. So that gentrification, suddenly, oh, everyone's talking about it. It's so cool. It's the latest thing. I sometimes feel a little bit like there's a similar-ish thing starting to happen in craft and sewing. I mean, you know, I'm sure a lot of people that maybe have sewn for years and years, and you know, maybe grew up needing to sew and needing to kind of reuse fabrics and stuff, probably might say the same about my book, may say, well, I've always been doing that. And suddenly here she is coming along writing a book all about it.
But your book is for people maybe who've been sewing for not so long,
Yeah.
people that weren't necessarily, sewing during the wars.
Yeah. So it's like I'm not, totally not trying to take away from that. I'm sort of trying to bring it to a new audience and celebrate that and acknowledge that, because I do feel that, from what I see on social media and from what I see and hear from meeting people at classes and at shows and things, it can be really expensive to really kind of immerse yourself in crafting and sewing, and particularly for dressmaking you need space to spread out your patterns, cut out your fabric. If you make, not that I do it, but I imagine if you're making quilts, you can start off quite small with it in your lap, piecing things together, but then maybe it gets to a stage where it's quite big, and again you maybe need to spread it out, to layer it up, to quilt it, to bind it. And I'm just really aware that not everyone has that luxury of that space to
Yeah.
do stuff and that spare cash to go out and buy loads of new fabrics, or the latest sewing machine, or the brand new pair of beautiful scissors. So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that fact, and I hope I have touched on it a bit in my book. I've tried to include projects that don't need loads of equipment or loads of space, as well as
Yeah, well, like the little scrap busting art pieces that you were talking about. You can literally do that sitting down. Yeah,
yeah, because you don't need loads of space. You could do it sat watching telly at your kitchen table, even a little kind of, temporary side table or something. So I want to kind of inspire people and encourage people that there's ways in to
yeah,
do all these things. It's not a kind of, right, to do this, you must have a spare room set aside in your huge house where you can set up a nice big table and buy a brand new fancy sewing machine and have a day or two a week that you can set aside and do these lovely activities. That's great if you've got that, but
because there's a luxury of time as well, isn't there?
yeah, I can imagine the majority of us don't have that luxury. I've been really lucky that in recent years I have, but also it's been kind of my job and part of my work. So I've kind of
Yeah,
had to create that environment. And like you've got two young kids, so you've got to fit stuff around them, haven't you? And I think a lot of people that are
yeah.
into sewing and crafting are in a similar situation, and it's that, oh, I really want to do some stuff, but I've only got one space to work, and it's where we eat our meals. And
Exactly. It literally is where we eat our meals. It's where I
uh,
sew. Yeah,
so I want to do something, but by the time I've kind of thought what it is I want to do and got all my stuff out, I've then got to clear it all away so that we can all sit down and eat. Yeah, it just sort of breaks my heart a little bit sometimes when I kind of
yeah.
read about and hear people talk about stuff like that, that they feel like it's this sort of lovely rarefied world where people just waft about.
Yeah.
Mm,
But that's what's good about your book is that you do have a real variety of projects in there, from things that probably did take quite a long time, like that pieced together beautiful denim coat,
yeah,
to the snood. There's a real variety, and presumably, you have to think about how much time you have. Like I would very that's what, probably one of the reasons I'm very drawn to those snoods, because I'm thinking I could make one of those in an evening with very little energy left.
yeah, totally. So yeah, hopefully people will feel that when they look at the book, that it's. And I just think that does just come from talking to people, meeting people.
Yeah.
I'm not locked away in my little ivory tower, being struck by inspiration, and kind of, oh, creating my magnificent works of art. I like to think I'm a bit in touch with people.
Definitely, definitely. And the variety of projects in that book really shows that, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Are there any individuals or companies that inspire you regarding their philosophy or their output relating to sustainability and sewing?
That's a great question. I can think of a couple. So, I don't know if you've heard of an artist called Claire Wellesley Smith.
No.
She's got a couple of books. She's written a couple of books. The first called Slow Stitch, and she's had one out this year, I think this year, called Resilient Stitch.
Oh, cool.
And she does loads of hand stitching. She does lots of work with community groups. She does lots of natural dyeing. I think she's got an allotment where she grows lots of plants that then she uses in the dyeing.
Wow, she's playing the long game.
Yeah. And she does some gorgeous work, and I find her writing really inspiring as well.
Awesome. I'll check her out, and I'll put links to her in the show notes.
And then sort of more of a sort of business. I really like what Grace at Beyond Measure does.
Right.
She's great at sourcing tools and equipment and supplies from independent makers. And
yes, yeah.
And she does a lot of commissioning independent makers and designers to make specific tools or specific kits or things like that for her shop. Yeah, and she has some gorgeous stuff. I got a darning egg from her recently. Yeah, to my shame, I can't remember. I think it was a company called Do Well Design, possibly, who actually made them. And I think they've made them from offcuts of different pieces of wood that have been stuck together and turned. And I do like a nice piece of turned wood, I have to say.
Confession time.
Yeah, so these darning eggs and darning mushrooms that she's commissioned from them, they're so beautiful because they're all a little bit different, because they're all these different combinations of different sorts of wood.
Nice.
Yeah, they're really
I'll definitely include those in the show notes. That sounds great. I have a darning mushroom that was my nan's, I think.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's even
so
better.
nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy. It's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best with your awesome new book.
Oh, thanks, Zoe. It's been really, really nice to chew the fat with you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!